With JJK now finished, I thought it would be fun to go back and revisit the Shinjuku arc, but this time in chronological order. So if you're not caught up, spoilers beware. Alright, so I'm going to consider the start of this final arc the moment that Gojo escapes from the prison realm, and we know that he is immediately standing on business when he teleports instantly to Kenjaku. However, this is when he discovers that Sukuna is inhabiting Megami's body and is protecting Kenjaku. So they ultimately decide to set the date for their fight 1 month from today on Christmas Eve, December 24th. Now what happens in the manga from here is we basically immediately flash forward to December 24th with a few scenes leading up to that. And then throughout Shinjuku, we get flashbacks, right? So now we're going to go over everything that happened in that month, but we don't have a perfect timeline for like which events in this training arc happened when. So I'm just going to talk about all of them kind of en masse. Clearly, Gojo gets brought up to speed on everything that's happened while he's in the prison realm, and he laments the fact that it's just the three of them, him, Shoko, and Ajichi, that are left from their class of students. And while they're having this discussion, we do see Ino come in and basically request permission in order to use Nanami's cursed tool, which he will later use during the fight against Sukuna. Next, throughout this month, there is just a whole bunch of planning, strategizing, and training. So we're just going to talk about the various different subsects of groups and what they focused on during this time. We know that in one of the biggest meetings, they were just planning for what happens if Gojo goes down, right? That's going to be our first attack. Gojo, hopefully he can win, but if not, what are we doing? And one of the first things they come to agree on is that Higuruma and Yuji should be the next to go in so that they can hopefully get deadly sentencing off on Sukuna and thus the executioner's sword to wield against him. There are also several other sets of plans that are intentionally kept from Yuji just to prevent it having any chance of getting back to Sukuna via their soul resonance. One such plan is the fact that Yuta is pairing up with Inumaki to prepare for the voice recording cursed speech moments so that, he'll have no idea that that is potentially coming. Yuta also does this with Hana and Jacob's Ladder in order to copy that. He takes advantage of the fact that both of them are missing their arms and that he will have that move in his arsenal. Meanwhile, Yuta also does some special training with Todo in order to help him facilitate the use of his new curse tool and curse technique, the Vibra Slap. They work on that together in order to set up for their ultimate jumping of Kenjaku, which will involve him swapping Yuta with Kenjaku at the very last moment in order to get a sneak attack off on him. Todo also does some secret planning with Meimei in order to prepare an escape plan for a potential Sukuna domain expansion. Here, Todo will swap out people with Meimei's crows outside the range of Sukuna's domain expansion. And again, they're keeping this all from Yuji. Also during this time, there is a private conversation between Yuta, Angel, and Shoko where Yuta talks to Angel about using Jacob's Ladder herself in the 11th hour as a final trump card. Also during this time, we know Meimei hunts down and executes the clan head for the new Shadow-style school. She does this so that Kusakabe can become the new clan head in order to get rid of the binding vows that were limiting them. This allows them to teach everyone simple domain in order to protect against Sukuna's domain, but also allows them to get rid of the kind of life-sucking binding vow that was in place amongst the disciples of the new Shadow-style school. Additionally, Meimei also sets up a gambling ring for Gojo versus Sukuna by utilizing her crows to kind of live broadcast the fight nationwide to sorcerers that wanted to watch. Now, Wee is also the MVP of this entire sequence because it's revealed that his curse technique has the ability to swap two people's souls, essentially, so that people can train in other people's bodies. So this sets up all of the training that's going to be happening during this month. Now, amongst these body swaps, we know the priorities were for people to learn Simple Domain and RCT. So of the body swaps we're aware of, we know that Yuji and Kusakabe swapped in order for Yuji to learn Simple Domain and barrier techniques in general. And then we know that Yuji and Yuta swapped in order for Yuji to learn RCT, and probably a bunch of other things as well. One of the things we do know is that Yuji gives Yuta one of his fingers for Rika to eat so that he can copy Shrine. And then Yuta gives Yuji these cursed tool gloves so that they can hide that injury from Sukuna and keep it a surprise. And now, thanks to 271, we also know that around this time, Yuji just did some one-on-one training or sparring with Gojo as well. And I think this is probably after Yuji swapped with both Kusakabe and Yuta, considering he says, "I thought you'd be the one I swapped with after Kusakabe," implying that he thought that because it's already definitely not going to happen, considering he swapped with Yuta. But really, it's not that big of a deal exactly when this scene happened. But we know that this is when Yuji clocks that there's something slightly different about Gojo, and Gojo says, you know, he's supremely confident and just wants this next generation to forget about him and surpass them. And Yuji says, "Of course we could never forget about you." And then the only other body swap that took place during this time that we know of with 100% certainty was between Yuta and Gojo. And they did this in order to prepare Yuta for the potential of having to pilot Gojo's body should he go down, and they need to use Kenjaku's body swap. And on that note, we are privy to a set of plans where Yuta comes up with this idea. Basically, the ultimate contingency of should Gojo go down and all of our other Sukuna plans fail, get me back here and I will body swap into Gojo's body, because he should not be the only one having to bear this burden of becoming a monster. I will do it as well so he does not have to stand alone. Also during this month, I would imagine toward the latter end of it, Gojo does indeed finally take out all of the higher-ups, realizing that Geto had left him behind and it was time for him to fully take action. He does this in order to set up the future for his students. We also know that during this time, presumably before the body swaps, that Yuji was training with both Choso and Noritoshi Kamo in order to perfect his newfound blood manipulation technique that he got from consuming his Curse Womb Death Painting brothers. Next, we also know that at some point during this time, Yuta traveled to go meet up with Miguel and LaRue in order to recruit them to come help in the Sukuna fight should things take a turn for the worse. We also know that during this time, Gojo would have told those he trusted about the location of Sukuna's 20th finger, which would have allowed them to get preparations in place in order to use that as a sneak attack should Nobara awake. Now, I know that was a lot, and there are probably a few things I missed. Now, also during this time, they obviously would have planned for their exact strategy against Sukuna, even though we don't explicitly see every facet of that plan mentioned, but I'm just going to go over that as we go into the fight instead of going over it twice. So the last thing we see leading up to this is Gojo preparing to go into battle and telling Ijichi that, you know, he has an important job to do, and using both Ijichi and Urahime in his surprise sneak attack to set off the fight. But as he walks to this fight, he obviously gets his one last hurrah from all of his students. Meanwhile, during this month time skip for the bad guys, they really aren't up to much, at least not that we're aware of. We know that Uraume goes and collects the rest of the fingers that they are able to find, which is all but one, because we know that Gojo has that last one. So Sukuna eats those fingers and then he goes and eats his mummified head as well, and then he's pretty much just waiting for December 24th. Next, we have the main event of the Shinjuku Showdown, Gojo versus Sukuna. And I'm not going to spend any time going over this fight, that's a whole other video. But while these two are fighting, all of the good guys are just at home base watching. Now, what are the other bad guys up to during this time? Well, presumably Uraume is just sitting back watching, not daring to interfere in Sukuna's fight. But meanwhile, Kenjaku is taking this chance when everyone else is preoccupied to go around and finish off the rest of the Culling Game players so that he can set up for the merger. Next, after Gojo is defeated by Sukuna, Kashimo immediately jumps in, ready for his 1v1. Sukuna makes short work of him, but this is the moment that all of the other allies' plans go into motion. As soon as Kashimo comes down, Rika swoops in, who actually has been holding Yuji, Higuruma, and Hikari in her mouth in order to mask their presence. So Yuji and Higuruma immediately jump in to fight Sukuna in order to get the deadly sentencing executioner's sword in play, while Hikari distracts Uraume. Now, at around that same time is when we have Takaba, Todo, and Yuta go and try and deal with Kenjaku, assuming that it might be their best chance to catch him off guard. So this is when Takaba comes across Kenjaku, and they have their entire fight, which serves to distract and get Kenjaku off guard, which allows Todo and Yuta to swap in for the sneak attack and deliver the killing blow. Now, while all that's happening, simultaneously back on the Sukuna front, we have the successful use of the death penalty from Higuruma's domain expansion. So he gets the Executioner's sword, however, confiscation takes Kamutoke instead of Sukuna's curse technique. But when Higuruma's domain ends, a few of the other Jujutsu sorcerers jump in to help Yuji and Higuruma fight Sukuna, namely Ino, Choso, and Kusakabe. Now, Sukuna is able to make pretty short work of them, but they were able to distract him long enough that it allowed Yuta to make his way all the way back after dealing with Kenjaku. This is where the next stage of this plan begins. Yuta casts his domain expansion and traps both Sukuna and Yuji inside. The plan is to use the sure hit effect of Jacob's Ladder and Yuji's soul punches in order to strip Megami away from Sukuna. So that is what they attempt to do, but unfortunately they aren't successful because Sukuna does end up getting a mortal wound off on Yuta, at which point he forcibly closes his domain on purpose in order to set up for the next sneak attack. And this is when Maki dives in and stabs Sukuna through the heart, because while Yuta and Yuji were inside of the domain, the rest of the sorcerers were setting up for this. Yuta transported his domain's coordinates when he cast it to a completely new location, where Maki had been setting up, waiting for the signal of him to bring his domain down as her cue to strike. So once that happens, Maki and Sukuna have a little bit of a 1v1 while Yuji recovers from his injuries, and then they basically all start throwing hands again. Ino, Yuji, Maki, Choso, and once again, Sukuna makes pretty short work of them to the point that Kusakabe is the only one left standing. And this is where we have peak Kusakabe Kaisen standing toe-to-toe with the King of Curses, buying enough time for everyone else to kind of recuperate or make their way to the battlefield, because as soon as he goes down, that's when we get the arrival of Miguel and LaRue. And here's where we just go full jump Kaisen, because we got Yuji, we got Choso, we got Maki, we got Miguel, and we got LaRue all going up against Sukuna. However, as is common for the King of Curses, he makes pretty short work of all of them until it is just mano a mano Yuji versus Sukuna. And this is when Yuji goes on his Black Flash parade, hitting Black Flash after Black Flash after Black Flash after Black Flash, up until the point that he awakens the Shrine Curse technique and starts using that on Sukuna as well. However, Sukuna was also having a come up of his own because he gets his domain expansion back via his own Black Flashes and a new pathway. He opens his domain, which causes the contingency plan from the good guys to go into effect. We have people casting Simple Domain. We have Ui teleporting in to help keep people out. We have Miwa coming in to help keep Maki safe with Simple Domain. And then we have Todo swapping people out with Mei's crows, ultimately only leaving Yuji and Choso at the center of the storm in this domain expansion, about to take the full brunt force of Sukuna's furnace. And this is the moment where we know Choso sacrifices himself to save his brother. After this, Yuji is facing down Sukuna alone, but not for long, because that's when we get the triumphant arrival of Todo on the scene, because now that he has successfully saved people from the domain expansion, he is free to come in and help. And then we get more Jump Jutsu Kaisen as these two go toe-to-toe with Sukuna, again, the goal being Yuji splitting Megami's soul from the cursed object. This continues until Sukuna gets his domain back once more, and just as he's about to cast it, that is when we have Yuta show back up in Gojo's body, and they have round 2. After that, we see Yuta collapse, and Yuji and Todo jump back in on Sukuna, with Angel also coming in for the assist with the 11th hour Jacob's Ladder. And then, of course, we get the crowning moment of Yuji finally opening his domain expansion. And then it's finally here that Yuji, along with both Megami via his 10 Shadows and Nobara via her Resonance 20th Finger sneak attack, is able to finally put down Sukuna. He is able to successfully split Megami from the cursed object and defeat him. So yeah, that is Shinjuku in roughly chronological order. And I know I kind of glossed over some things, especially in the midst of combat, but this video is already like getting really long, so I wanted to try to keep it as succinct as possible. Now, I want to give a massive shout out to Nitro for donating for this video. Thank you so much, man. This was a really cool idea and something that I did want to do once JJK ended, to go back and try to piece together the actual timeline of events. So I know we're still a little bit hazy on the exact ordering of some things, but again, I think this is a pretty close approximation of a chronological order. So Nitro, again, thank you so much, man. And to all of you, thank you so much for watching.